UFC President Dana White announced UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi on October 26th, and the main event will be Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway for the featherweight title, and I'm assuming the BMF title, but we'll talk about that in a second. Co-main event. I am so happy they rebooked this. We are getting Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev, an amazing middleweight fight. And that is a 5-round, non-title, non-main event. I love when the UFC does that. Then you also have Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov 2. A great rematch from 2021 of two top heavyweights. You also have Magomed Ankalaev versus Aleksander Rakic, which really doesn't make sense right now, but we'll go through that in a second. And the card's just stacked. I mean, you have Lerone Murphy versus Dan Ige. You have Rafael Dos Anjos versus Jeff Neal. This card is amazing from top to bottom. Let's start off with the main event. I am so thankful and I am so relieved that Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway is finally announced, because I started to have a fear they weren't going to book it. There was back and forth between Topuria and Holloway, and Topuria saying accept the fight, and I don't know what's truly going on. But in my mind, and I've talked about this in the past, I was scared that the UFC didn't want to consolidate the featherweight title and the BMF title. Because if both are on the line here, which they should be, it wouldn't make any sense. Oh, I'm going to fight you, but my belt's not on the line. When I'm the BMF, which I'm not a fan of the BMF belt. I don't care if it exists or doesn't exist. But once the BMF fights the undisputed champion, the BMF title is now on the line. You know, I know technically Jorge Masvidal had a belt he couldn't lose, but Topuria says, look, if you're going to fight me, you're going to put on the BMF belt as well. Now, I don't know if the UFC wanted to consolidate them. And maybe they're not. I mean, they didn't say it. They didn't mention it, because the UFC likes to have the BMF belt as just a fake WWE belt to prop up random pay-per-views where they need it. So I was terrified that they were going to be like, well, you know what? We don't want Max to lose the BMF, or not necessarily lose the BMF, but we don't want the BMF and the Undisputed being tied together, because then, in a way, the BMF is just completely pointless, even though it's already a WWE gimmick belt. So I was worried that maybe somehow they were just going to book Topuria versus Volkanovski too, and then have Holloway fight someone else on a different card so it could serve as a main event. Because you look at the kind of the pay-per-views for the rest of the year, it's really hard to figure out what is going to be the main event for UFC 307, but we'll talk about that in a second. In terms of the fight itself, I absolutely love Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. And this is a crazy storyline in a way, because you have Max Holloway, who is younger than Volkanovski, who lost to Volkanovski 3 times, who got the brakes beat off him by Volkanovski in their last fight 2 years ago, I believe it is now. I believe that was 2022, if I'm not mistaken, UFC 276. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now, which is crazy. That feels like just yesterday. But you have Max Holloway. After that event, a lot of people were burying Max. They were like, well, he's never getting a title again, at least not as long as Volkanovski's around. And Volkanovski gets knocked out by Ilia Topuria in February at UFC 298, and it opened the door wide open for Max Holloway. And a lot of people were thinking he's next in line anyway. Then he accepts the fight against Justin Gaethje. A lot of people wrote him off, myself included. I didn't think he had any chance against Justin Gaethje. I thought it was a stupid fight for him to go up to lightweight when he already had a featherweight title shot. He goes out there against Justin Gaethje, he beats him, he KOs him, gets a viral KO in the 5th round, buzzer beater KO, and now it made the fight even bigger. How weird is that, though? He beat a lightweight to earn a featherweight title shot, but his resume speaks for itself. He's a former featherweight champion, and this is such a compelling matchup. And honestly, this is one of those fights where it's hard to lock down a prediction, because you have Ilia Topuria. I've been so high on Topuria for so long. I'm mad I didn't pick him against Volkanovski. I've picked him in every fight. I've been a big believer in Topuria for a long time. I said, look, his striking is getting better and better. He's primarily a grappler jiu-jitsu guy who's just struck in the UFC and just knocking guys dead. And then I said, you know what? I don't know. Against Volkanovski, Volkanovski's a different beast. And maybe had Volkanovski not came off of a KO loss against Islam Makhachev, maybe things could have been different. Maybe, I don't know. But he goes out there, sleeps Volkanovski. I actually think Topuria got screwed more than anyone with Volkanovski stepping in on short notice against Islam Makhachev. Because imagine how legendary, and I haven't really thought this completely through until right now. Imagine how legendary Topuria would have been coming into UFC 298. You have a Volkanovski who, hasn't lost at featherweight basically ever. You have a Volkanovski who's been a dominant champion. You have a Volkanovski who a lot of people were saying he beat Islam Makhachev and should have been double champ. And then he goes out there and just mauls Yair Rodriguez. And he looks unbeatable. And it's like, who's going to beat Volkanovski? Think about how the perception would have been going into that fight if Volk didn't, have his ego to step in against Islam Makhachev on short notice and get slept in the first round. So the UFC robbed Topuria of his moment. While it was crazy that he KO'd Volkanovski, imagine how much bigger that moment would have been had Volkanovski not got slept by Islam Makhachev just a couple months before. That would have been one of the most shocking moments in MMA history. But nonetheless, it was still super impressive for Topuria. And now Topuria has done something that Max Holloway has failed to do 3 times. And in this matchup, you have Topuria who's so well-rounded. But Max Holloway's so well-rounded too. You have a Topuria who can wrestle. He has jiu-jitsu. He has good striking. He has knockout power. Max Holloway's not really known for his knockout power, but he just slept Justin Gaethje dead. Now, I don't think that translates to necessarily having one-punch KO power. They were just swinging wild. Max Holloway kind of had a wounded animal in there and brutally KO'd him, baited him into, brawling and then brutally KO'd him. But, man, imagine seeing these two stare down from each other. Imagine. UFC 308 is going to be incredible. And this is just the main event. They stacked this card. And also, I know, if you look at the poster, I'll put it up on the screen real quick. Or actually, this is Tapology. But if you look at the poster they put, it says 10 p.m. Eastern here. We have clarification now that it's not going to be 10 p.m. Eastern. This is going to be prime time in Abu Dhabi. So the main card will start at 10 p.m. Abu Dhabi time. Whatever the time that is Eastern time. I think it's 2 p.m. Eastern time, if I'm not mistaken. 3 p.m. Eastern time. I'm not looking at that right now. But, I mean, this card, look at this card. It's so good. Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway, Robert Whittaker, Khamzat Chimaev, Ciryl Gane, Alexander Volkov Magomed Ankalaev, Alexander Rakic, Lerone Murphy, Dan Ige, Jeff Neal, Rafael Dos Anjos. Incredible card. And each fight is so good. We're going to go through each fight in a minute. I want to look at the layout of the pay-per-views for the rest of 2024 here in a second. But Topuria, Max Holloway, incredible fight. I'm trying to give you an early prediction so we can move on to the next fight. Look, I got to go Topuria. Max Holloway beat up Justin Gaethje, fair enough. But Justin Gaethje, I feel like in that fight, maybe he still loses. I'm not saying he wins. That spinning kick to the nose in the first round against Justin Gaethje, the tail end of the first round, I think ruined him for that entire fight. And then he gets, brutally chinned in the last second of the fight, which was absolutely crazy. But I just don't see a lot of holes in Topuria's game. What is Max Holloway going to exploit his cardio? I don't see that happening. So I'm going to pick Ilia Topuria. I might change my mind. I know there's going to be a lot of hype surrounding Max Holloway right now. But I'm going to go Ilia Topuria. Maybe if this was in Salt Lake City, which was rumored for a little bit, Salt Lake City, which would have been crazy to have Max Holloway fighting for the belt at elevation with his cardio, because that's his one advantage in this fight. I just think Topuria, he has power to keep Max off of him. He has good wrestling. He has good jiu-jitsu. It's going to be very interesting. This is one of the first matchups in a real long time. I'm like, you know what? I don't know who's going to win this fight at all. It's a crazy matchup. Really looking forward to UFC Abu Dhabi. Co-main event. We have Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. I love this fight. I absolutely love this fight. This is a banger matchup. I loved it when they had it for the original main event of UFC Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, Khamzat Chimaev had to pull out of that fight. I'm happy that they rebooked this, and I'm happy that it's 5 rounds. And I believe this is the #1 contender fight for the middleweight division. There was a lot of talk of Robert Whittaker versus Sean Strickland. That made a lot of sense. Sean Strickland ducked him. As far as I'm concerned, Sean Strickland has an L on his resume from Robert Whittaker. He said, nah, I'm not taking that fight. I don't want that fight. I split decision Paulo Costa. I deserve a title shot. Even though I didn't deserve my first title shot. So, I think Sean Strickland, unless Adesanya wins against Dricus du Plessis in a couple weeks and Adesanya really wants to push that rematch, I think Sean Strickland's screwed here. Because the winner of Robert Whittaker, Khamzat Chimaev, is going to have earned a middleweight title shot. And I'm just so happy that this fight is rebooked. One thing I want to address here, because I'm so tired of hearing it online, regurgitate it. It seems like the media is going along with it. A lot of fans are going along with it. A lot of hate on Khamzat Chimaev for pulling out of fights. He pulls out of so many fights, and he's always sick, and Dana has kind of said it too a little bit. But let's look at Khamzat Chimaev, because he has pulled out of 2 fights ever. And I know a lot of people don't understand that because they look at maybe his Tapology and they're like, no, Joey, you're wrong. He's pulled out of more fights than that. So if you go back on his resume, he pulled out against Robert Whittaker. He was sick. He had to go to the hospital. There was, some rumors circulating around that he had food poisoning. That came out to not be true at all, even though people ran with it and they were just basically just nonstop, hating on Khamzat Chimaev for pulling out. But then you go back to other fights, right? You go back to the Paulo Costa fight. Paulo Costa pulled out with staph infection here, okay? I know the Nate Diaz fight got canceled because of a weight miss, but that fight still, they went forward with a Kevin Holland fight. So that fight doesn't even count as a cancellation, doesn't count as a pullout. And then you have these Leon Edwards fights, okay? And if you were watching around this time in December of 2020, both Leon Edwards and Khamzat Chimaev were sick in December here, okay? Even here, with the initial announcement, was that Leon Edwards pulled out. You can see it's on here on Tapology. Now, when they rebooked it for January, Khamzat and Leon weren't even sure they were going to be ready for January. So then you have January come around, and Khamzat Chimaev officially pulls out here. Leon is supposedly ready to go. Khamzat pulls out. Now, Khamzat is still sick, and it's one of those things like where Raul Rosas Jr., remember he pulled out the night of the fight. He was sick. They said, oh, we're going to rebook it for next week. And then he was like, well, I'm not fighting next week. I'm still sick. That's what happened here. They rebooked it for literally... It's not that long later because if you look at it, it's January 20th and then it's March 13th. So it's basically a month and a half later they rebook him and he's still sick from the original time that he pulled out. So this all right here, these 3 fight cancellations, this is really one pullout. And then you have the Robert Whittaker pullout from earlier this year for UFC Saudi Arabia. So people got to stop acting like Khamzat Chimaev, some massive pullout merchant who pulls out of every single fight. Like people were hating on Paulo Costa, and a lot of that stuff was contractual stuff with the UFC. I'm so sick and tired of hearing that narrative. Like Khamzat pulls out like crazy. And maybe if he makes it to the fight. I'm annoyed too we haven't seen Khamzat fight. And there's other stuff going on behind the scenes with Visa and whatnot. I'm disappointed as well. But to sit here and act like he's pulled out of every single fight ever and, this and that. And also, while we're on the topic of Khamzat Chimaev, this win right here, this Kamaru Usman win at UFC 294, is the most underrated win in UFC history. It was a close fight. It was a competitive fight. But Khamzat Chimaev beat Kamaru Usman on short notice. Kamaru Usman was on short notice. He's in great shape as well. Okay? Shout out to Kamaru Usman for taking the fight. If he would have won, that would have been an incredible win. But people are knocking Chimaev for having a competitive fight with Kamaru Usman. In my opinion, this win by Khamzat Chimaev was more impressive than either win by Leon Edwards. Oh, he fluked a head kick KO. Oh, then he squeaked by a trilogy fight and kept the title by cheating and grabbing the fence. Khamzat went out there and ragdolled Kamaru Usman in the first round. Ragdolled him. Picked him up, took him down, took his back. Now, did he get tired? Did he get injured in the first round and then later rounds he was kind of tired and it was a close fight? Yes. He still won the fight. But people acting like Khamzat doesn't have any claim to title contention are completely delusional. I understand that Kamaru Usman isn't a middleweight, okay? But he fought at middleweight, and this win over Kamaru Usman is a much better win than any win over Paulo Costa would have ever been. Paulo Costa doesn't have a quality win on his entire resume. So beating Paulo Costa does absolutely nothing, in my opinion. It barely does anything. For the people hyping up the Sean Strickland win, it doesn't do that much. I think a win over Kamaru Usman that impressively, where he ragdolled him and 10-8'd him in the first round, arguably, is much better than anything. So this is the most disrespected win I've ever seen in my entire life. And he's a guy that beat Gilbert Burns. He beat Gilbert Burns. He beat Li Jingliang, beat Gilbert Burns, was basically owed a welterweight title shot. Now, he messed it up. He messed it up by missing weight. He got gifted that Nate Diaz fight, but it was a foregone conclusion he was getting a title shot for Gilbert Burns. He was promised a title shot after Kamaru Usman. Now, I'm not saying give him a title shot. I don't want to see him get a title shot right this second. I want to see him earn a title shot. If he beats Robert Whittaker, it's time for Khamzat Chimaev to get a title shot. And I think he will get it. I think, he's a future star for the UFC. And I know there's some issues up in the air with his visa. And who knows what's actually going to happen. But as long as he can stay active, and that was his claim to fame. He was staying active. He was fighting every 2 weeks back in 2020. If he can stay active, I think Khamzat Chimaev could go on a run because I think his skills do match the hype. I was one of the few people back in 2020 and 2021, I was going to pick Khamzat Chimaev in each one of those Leon Edwards fights. And now that I've seen what Bilal just did to him, and Leon's the best version he's ever been, and I've seen what Khamzat Chimaev did to Kamaru Usman, I would undoubtedly pick Khamzat Chimaev in that fight. Khamzat would have ran through Leon Edwards, which would have been crazy because Khamzat was not even in the top 15 at that time. He would have ran through a top 5 guy in Leon Edwards. But overall, let's talk about the fight real quick. Robert Whittaker is a very tough fight. A very, very tough fight. He's coming off that absolute destruction of Ikram Aliskerov on short notice. Before that, he beat up Paulo Costa. You know, it's not that great, but he is a former champion. And, you know, he did lose to Dricus Du Plessis, but look at Dricus Du Plessis. He's now the champion. Went out there, made Sean Strickland go cry on a podcast, and then beat him up and took his title afterwards. So that loss hasn't, you know, it's aged quite well for a loss. And I think it's a really tough matchup. But I think Khamzat Chimaev, this was going to be my pick back in, you know, March when it was originally supposed to happen, or June when it was originally supposed to happen. I think Khamzat runs through Robert Whittaker. I think that Khamzat's grappling is next level. Now, I do worry about his cardio. And I think it's smart if Robert Whittaker, you know, kind of campaigned for a 5-round co-main event. But I think Khamzat's just too good. His striking's so good. His wrestling's so good. His jiu-jitsu's so good. His stamina's the one question mark. But I think a lot of people are overlooking Khamzat Chimaev because of, oh, he only beat Kamaru Usman at middleweight on short notice. I mean, he took that fight on short notice as well. I hate when nobody gives anybody credit for a short notice fight. It's just like, might as well not even happen. And he was looking so good at welterweight, beating Gilbert Burns. You know, look what he did to Kevin Holland. I know Kevin Holland's kind of a scrub, but made him look like a scrub. Defeated him in like the first 2 minutes of the fight and submitted him. I think Khamzat's going to be too much for Robert Whittaker. I think he's going to steamroll him, and I think he's just going to blow through him at UFC 308. I'm picking Khamzat to win unless he gets to the later rounds and starts to fade. And if he beats Robert Whittaker, that's a statement win. He does deserve a title shot. Now, in terms of some of the other fights, you have Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov, a rematch from 2021 where Ciryl Gane clearly won the fight, outstruck him, outgrappled him. But this Alexander Volkov's a different version of himself. He's an incredible fighter. He's coming off that domination against Sergey Pavlovich. This is a matchup where I really don't know who to pick in this fight. But this is a quality heavyweight fight. And to be honest, this could be for number 1 contender. I know right now you have Jones versus Stipe, the dead carcass of Stipe, answering phones at the fire department. But, you know, and I know you have Tom Aspinall waiting in the wings, but I think that John Jones and Tom Aspinall, or not John Jones and Tom Aspinall, I think John Jones and Stipe, whoever wins, they're going to both retire anyway. If Stipe wins, I see a rematch, which is crazy, because then Tom Aspinall will forever be the interim champion. But John Jones wins, I think they both retire. Tom Aspinall's elevated to the undisputed champion. Who's going to be number 1 contender? It'll be the winner of Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov. I forgot his name there for a second. So I love that matchup. It's a great fight. The last fight I want to talk about really in depth here. But by the way, I'm going to go Ciryl Gane. I think Ciryl Gane probably beats him again. But don't count out Volkov. He's improved significantly. Now, the last fight I want to discuss is Magomed Ankalaev versus Aleksander Rakic. What the hell is going on here? It should be Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira. That should be the next light heavyweight title fight. Why are we not booking that fight? How does that make any sense at all? It makes absolutely no sense. Ankalaev has earned his title shot. His win streak speaks for itself. And I know people are like, oh, he only beat Johnny Walker. It doesn't matter. Look at his win streak. Light heavyweight isn't that good to begin with. Pereira versus Ankalaev was the fight to make. Now, I do believe there's a justification for that. A lot of people are all of a sudden saying Pereira's going to go up to heavyweight. I don't think Dana wants to potentially ruin Pereira by sending him to heavyweight. And especially with heavyweight log jammed right now. I think what's most likely going on is far less insidious. I think Pereira's probably going to take the rest of the year off. Ankalaev fought in January. He probably asked for a fight. He said, I'll fight in Abu Dhabi and I'll still earn my title shot. I'll get another win because this fight makes no sense. Rakic is coming off a loss against Yuri Prochazka. Now, you looked good in that loss, but how does it make any sense to have him fight Ankalaev? It really doesn't make any sense right now other than to keep Ankalaev busy while Pereira sits on the sidelines for a little bit, taking a much-needed vacation, considering, you know, he saved UFC 295. He was already on the card. Then he saves UFC 300. Then he saves UFC 303. So I'm assuming that's why this happened. And Ankalaev's just so confident in his abilities. He's like, look, I'll go out there, starch Rakic, and then I'll get my title shot anyway. So I'm hoping that's what's going to happen because I'm really disappointed. I wanted to see Ankalaev versus Pereira. That was a banger matchup for the end of 2024. In terms of who I'm picking in this fight, I think Ankalaev is the uncrowned champ. I think Ankalaev should have got the win over Jan Blachowicz. I think he should have been the undisputed light heavyweight champion. And I think the judges kind of messed that up. It wasn't the worst decision ever. But I think he goes out there and beats Rakic. Rakic took a lot of damage against Jiří Procházka. Rakic, every time he's had a big moment in his career, he's fumbled somehow. And I think he's going to fumble against Ankalaev as well. If somehow Rakic wins, that's a massive fumble by Ankalaev, and now we're never going to see Pereira versus Ankalaev. So incredible matchup, but I'm picking Ankalaev to win. The last thing I want to take a look at is the schedule for the rest of the year for the UFC. Because right now, if you look at the pay-per-views that are scheduled, you have UFC 305 August 17th, which is Adesanya Pereira, or Duplessis Adesanya. Then you have 306, which is the Sphere, O'Malley Dvalishvili. Then you have 307, which is October 5th. And right now, you don't have a main event for this card. This card is kind of right around the corner, October 5th, and you have no main event. You have a decent card here, but what's going to be the main event now? It doesn't make any sense because you look at champions. Okay, Pantoja. Is Pantoja going to be the main event against Kai Asakara? The new guy they signed for flyweight? Maybe that's the main event, but that's not a huge main event for Salt Lake City, but that could be it. O'Malley's on the Sphere. Topuria is on 308. Islam's injured. Bilal Muhammad, they're going to try to make Bilal Muhammad turn around that quick. I don't think so. Not going to happen. Dricus is fighting. Pereira's not fighting Ankalaev, so unless he's fighting some random heavyweight on that card, it's not going to be the main event. Jones is out until November. Grasso's fighting on Noche. Weili Zhang, I don't think she has a fight booked right now. Yeah, she doesn't have a fight booked right now. So what I'm thinking is probably going to be, unless they change that date to like Las Vegas and do like a Conor Chandler fight, it's going to have to be probably Alexandre Pantoja versus the new guy, Kai Asakura. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't have it in front of me right now. And maybe co-main, Raquel Pennington versus Juliana Pena, which, I mean, that's a horrible main. That's a horrible main and co-main for a card. But there's nothing else available right now. There's nothing else available. But the end of this year is going to be incredible. I just wonder what that 307 main event is going to be. But overall, UFC 308 is absolutely incredible. That's a bang-up card if I've ever seen one. It's amazing. It's stacked. The end of 2024 is going to be incredible. I cannot wait. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.